to the cloud we go. This is R795, Week 9, Part 2. This is an Ask Me Anything episode, AMA, or AJA, Ask John Anything. And since John's an expert at all types of research methods, I think he could have something of import and value in each of your dissertations. So I think instead of the normal way that I kind of hold some of these sessions where I interview someone about their career and all that, I think we'll just skip that part. We'll get part of John's career in the answers that he gives to us, and I'll embed other questions along the way. I think what I would like to do is start with a brief kind of introduction from John himself, telling us what he's up to, what his interests are, and a little bit about his new book that's come out, and maybe you can share that with us. And then we'll go one by one. Each one of you can tell him a little bit about your dissertation that you're working on, including Sunmei, who's my TA. And maybe John will give you some little bits of wisdom tonight to take back to your place and think about and reflect on and so forth. So I think that's the way we'll do it. I don't think this will last a long time, maybe about 45 minutes, John, at most an hour, but we'll probably go until 8 o'clock or a little bit, 5 after 8 or something like that. We'll get everyone to ask a question of you. But first, John, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you came to IU, and then where you're at now and what you're up to and what your interests are.
Okay. I appreciate your recording this, Kurt. In addition to, I suppose, being able to share this with folks later on, it almost guarantees I'm going to behave.
I thought you were saying for your memoirs, but okay.
Dr. Bonk can see me in other circles, and sometimes I might say something a bit too colorful, but no, I won't.
I stopped the recording.
Good strategy there. Okay, so hi everybody. My name is John Hitchcock. Feel free to call me John. And I am a principal research scientist at an organization called WESTAT. WESTAT is a research firm which is based in the Washington, D.C. area, although I still live in Bloomington, Indiana. Left over from my time when I was a tenured faculty member at Indiana University, working in your department. WESTAT is a employee-owned research corporation that focuses on conducting typically large-scale studies, and its clients are the United States Department of Education, several philanthropies, state entities, and sometimes we do international research as well. As a firm, WESTAT is actually probably best known out of its various competitors in the industry for its survey work, where I do some survey work myself, but I'm not a survey methodologist, nor am I a sampling statistician, although I get to work with those folks often. It can be a little bit on the quiet side because every now and then a WESTAT statistician might be in the background. For example, during political seasons, when someone's going to call a state, oftentimes they project that out, and you might see a WESTAT person. You won't see a WESTAT person, but there might be a WESTAT person in the background saying, "Okay, it's time to say that Arizona is going to go for X candidate." We're confident enough. My own work, I primarily focus on understanding interventions and programs designed for students typically with specialized learning needs. And in my current portfolio, I'm the principal investigator of a study called the National Summer Learning and Enrichment Study. It's funded by the Wallace Foundation. Dr. Bonk, the old Reader's Digest stuff. You remember that? That's the source of the funds. It was the Wallace family that had that one. So now they have a foundation that's very interested on matters of equity and K through 12 education, as well as school leadership. I'm working on a national study where what we're doing is trying to understand how districts have implemented and changed their summer programming in response to the pandemic back in summer 2021 and the last summer we just got through, while using something called American Recovery Plan dollars. I'm also a project director for some work at the U.S. Department of Ed. What we're trying to do is conduct, in essence, right now, a feasibility study so that we can think about generating evidence that might be used to inform future federal laws so that we could better support students with disabilities as they're being educated in inclusion environments. I'm also the principal investigator of a randomized control trial where we were studying a dropout prevention program in rural schools. I'm sure I'm forgetting something. I also continue to do meta-analytic work with primarily the What Works Clearinghouse as we try to document and summarize the best evidence that's out there for informing practices and policies to support students in special education. And
I'll point out, last week we had someone talk about systematic reviews of the research and meta-analyses of the research, and she's writing a book. I got you helped get her SAGE. You gave us the contact. So
good. Okay. That's good. Okay. I'm glad about that. Yeah, excellent.
So she had a Rutledge contract set right away, and I said, wait for SAGE, and she waited for SAGE because it's a better one for a book on research methods, and they're much better much more supportive, I think. And so we had that, and we've done together 2 systematic reviews, special issues of different journals on systematic reviews of the research, one on emerging technologies and the new one on online learning, the next one on professional development of teachers for online learning. So I'll do a third one after this second one goes in. So I've been learning a lot about systematic reviews of the research. I knew a bit about meta-analysis before that. So you can see John's done he's got a lot of projects. You think, one major project like this would take a lot of time. He just rattled off 6, 7, or 8, and you were going to say another one. You just thought of another one, John, that you were on? Or
actually, I'm working on a project where we're studying, and this is easier for me to do because I have a small role in it. I focus primarily on implementation analyses, but it's a randomized control trial that's it's being conducted by a consortium of faculty at Georgia State University, University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and University of North Carolina. And what we're doing is testing the impact of a program called Read 180, which for those of you interested in design, it's a computer-based reading intervention program, and we're testing it out in juvenile detention settings in the state of Georgia, with the hopes of determining whether use of that program in those settings yields better learning outcomes for those students.
And so John, if you haven't recognized, has a school psychology background in addition to a methodology background, and was at Ohio University before he came to IU in Athens, Ohio. And I forgot where you got your PhD at.
The University at Albany.
Oh, right, the University at Albany.
Yeah, and that research program that's up there. I started out in school psychology. In fact, I was a associate editor for the School Psychology Review, which is the peer review journal outlet for the National Association for School Psychologists, and I supported that journal in various ways for about 10 years.
So you are working for WestEd, which is in DC, but I had thought you were working in Boston. Was that a different company, different consulting company, or not?
Yeah, that was Apt Associates. One of the things that's and either way, I live in Bloomington regardless. One of the things that's worthwhile for folks to consider if they decide to pursue careers outside of academia, it doesn't necessarily have to be an either or prospect, is as we move forward in life, the prospect of working from a distance remotely is becoming more and more common. And when I was thinking about making a change, I have 2 children. One is a freshman now, actually attending IU, and the other is thanks. The other is a junior at one of the local high schools, and the prospect of moving and leaving Bloomington wasn't very palatable. But when I learned that places were pretty open to having me work from a distance, then you start getting into a scenario where you can get things like a DC or a Boston-based salary, but enjoying that here.
That's another good point. Do you want to show us your book?
Oh gosh, yeah. Sorry, it's right here. Sorry, you told me to do that, Kurt.
Yeah. And not don't just show us. Tell us the story behind it and how long it took to do it.
Let's see if you can see that. That's the book. I'm not sure how it's showing up on your screen.
Just hold it back a little bit, a couple inches further back, and I think we can. Right. No, the lighting's not good, but okay. Yeah.
Let me try this.
There we go. That we got it. Now I can see it.
I don't know if that helps also.
Nope. The previous one, the way you had it.
Okay.
That just like that.
You can see that.
All right. Yeah.
So this is one of my books. I'm a co-author of 4 of them. This is the one that obviously just came out. I have another one that's in press. This is called the Routledge Handbook for Advancing Integration in Mixed Methods Research. Mixed methods, of course, is named because it entails connecting qualitative and quantitative inquiry, typically in a way that develops a kind of synergy where one hopes that you're able to both conceptualize and address research questions that would be difficult to pursue in a so-called monomethod approach, quantitative only or what have you. And one of the things that we have to think seriously about in the mixed methods world is the notion of integration. How is it that you get findings from those 2 different arenas to connect together? And so I've been working with a number of colleagues on different design ideas so that we can advance our ways and our conceptualization, how we might be able to better amalgamate, connect, pull together these different forms of inquiry. In that work, one of the ideas that I had introduced is this idea that people will think about data, and I think of data as information. And that information sometimes comes to us in the form of numbers or quantitative concepts, things like magnitude, distance, time, correlation. But information is also sometimes comes to us in the sense of feelings, something called intersubjectivity, which is this idea that we might all agree that something is true. And so I had suggested that one way to think about integration is to not necessarily assume that data comes exclusively in quantitative or qualitative form, but in an integrative form initially. And if you think about data in that way, then you might be able to start to develop some more seamless design ideas in your inquiry. So examples that we've worked with over time would get into things like Bayesian inference. We think about how single case designs, like AB designs, have inherently inherent connections between quantitative and qualitative work. And I think that is somewhat frees a person up to think about different design ideas, but you don't have to think about it that way. There are those who find it much more comfortable to think about classifying quantitative and qualitative work, and that's perfectly fine. The person who worked on this, it is a handbook. The person who worked on this with me is Tony Onwe-Boozy. He's on the faculty of education at Cambridge University. And he also has appointments with multiple universities, honorary appointments, University of Johannesburg, St. John's University. I know I'm forgetting a couple, but he's
St. John's where, in Canada or
New York City and Queens.
Oh, in New York City.
Yeah,
You've
but
mentioned him before to me. Is he the person who was the president of the Mixed Methods Association?
Yeah, he was president of Mixed Methods International Research Association. He also has had a number of other pieces, and he's kind of like a Dr. Bonk in the sense that if you ever look him up on Google Scholar, he'll have this he'll be in the stratosphere with his H index and the number of times his works have been cited and so on and so forth. And so he's gotten quite a lot done that's out there, and so he remains a major name in the mixed methods field. And
John,
So
can you type his name in the chat window, John, while I ask the next question, while I get chatter away here? So my students have done proposals, and many of them in their proposals have included Cresswell's books, or Cresswell and Cresswell. So I'd say of the 8 students in this class, and Sunmei is included, of the 9 people, I'd say 8 out of 9 are doing mixed method studies. Okay. So they're doing studies that relate to your handbook. So I think it'd be a good time for us to go do a round robin and just get everyone to tell you a little bit about what they're doing, and pose a question and see, just an ask John anything kind of thing question. And I think maybe we go with Kim first, and bring Kim into the conversation from the East Coast. She's at SUNY Cobleskill. So you're a SUNY, you did yours at Albany?
yeah, I know where Cobleskill is. That's great.
She's in the egg school there. She's teaching about dairy cattle and all sorts of things, right?
Yeah, that's not surprising.
Yes. So I'm an associate professor of animal science, and my concentration is in dairy cattle management. So my husband's a dairy nutritionist. I hardly ever see him, but he makes more money than I could ever hope to ever make in my life.
That's great. Yeah, and of course, Kurt is from Wisconsin, so he's probably a great liver.
I smelled the derriere.
Okay. By the way, this right here is why it's best that we're being recorded, just so that
you know. Totally understand. So I am doing a mixed, well, I think I'm doing a mixed methods study. So it's not that I'm up in the air. I was just off on sabbatical leave for the past year, and now I'm on family medical leave to help out with my father. And so I just have a few things that are up in the air, being out of work for almost a year and a half now, that I'll be out. But my research topic is looking at a needs analysis for developing an online animal science program. So I want to be able to, we have a very big push at our university right now to develop online programming in some of our science specific disciplines. And there are not a lot of ag programs that have been historically hands-on that have online programming. So one of the reasons why I was able to take the full year sabbatical was to be able to help develop this program. So I want to look at what is needed and the perceptions of faculty and of the faculty, not only that are current, but past faculty, because we have a very large department. And I'm looking at doing a mixed methods study for this, because in my field, at least, qualitative methods is not something that is looked on favorably, I guess, if you would. In animal science specifically, I'm not talking about agricultural education, that's its own thing. But in animal science itself, it's very different. So I'm looking at mixed methods to be able to tell a more deeper, richer picture, and to be able to answer the questions that quantitative methods would not be able to solve. So
and before you answer, John, or comment, I'll point out that there's 7 people who are dissertating here, or going to be dissertating. 6 of them are in the EDD program, so they're more looking at their own workplace and setting, or in answering questions there. Sabahat is the outlier, right? Sabahat, who's working with Rob Goldstone in the psychology department, brain sciences department, and she double majored, I think, Sabahat, in both IST and cognitive science, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So we'll go to, after Kim, we'll go to Megan next, and then we'll go to Ben, and then we'll go to Sabahat, and then we'll go to Ashat and Shannon at the end, and then Sunmei after that, I think. So go ahead, Kim, ask your question, and John, give it a shot.
So John, I'm gonna be pretty honest with you. I've been kind of toying back and forth of whether or not I should do a mixed methods study, if I should just go qualitative and not have quantitative in there at all. What are your thoughts? I guess not really knowing much about any of my research.
My immediate thought is it depends on what your research question is, and it also depends on your context and your overall purpose. If you find that mixed methods inquiry is going to help you, then you should use it. And if it turns out that it's perhaps not, you shouldn't, because you want to be very careful about, there's a phrase that's out there, don't put the cart before the horse. Right. And so in that sense, for those of you who might not be familiar with that phrase, it's usually the horse that pulls the cart. And your research questions and what you want to know would be your horse, and the research design and the methodological decisions should follow that. The only exception to that I'm aware of is if you happen to be an inquiry student and you're focusing on changing methods in inquiry. But otherwise, I recommend that you think about the theory, that's what theories are available, your sense of conducting a needs assessment, and then the context in which you would do it, and then from there ask yourself what kind of information, what will I do with the findings. If you are dealing with a relatively small enclosed environment, such that you're conducting perhaps an almost kind of a case study kind of an approach, and you think that you can learn what you need by focusing primarily on observations, interviews, and document analyses, then sure, stay primarily in the qualitative realm. If you find that you start to wish to conduct needs assessments with large numbers of people, such that you might want to think about developing a survey, then you're very quickly going to be getting into the mixed methods arena. So in that sense, it is always best to try to think about what's the scope of your work, and then let the methods follow.
Thank you so much.
Oh, sure. Glad to. And one thing too that might be helpful as you think about the this notion. I've been around it for a long time. This idea that qualitative methods in some circles don't get the same respect as quantitative work does. There's typically going to be three primary reasons, one of which you can't do a lot about. The first one is that you might have the so-called closed mind to it. People just, they've been told qualitative methods are bad, so therefore they're bad, and they're never really gonna. They're not rigorous. Perhaps someone will say, I don't really understand them, so I can't embrace them. It's not that I wish to put a valence on it, but we'll just stick with what we know. The other part where you run into this, though, is some folks will take a more aggressive stance and say that qualitative methods are not rigorous. And one of the things you should think about doing then is start to become familiar with literature that's out there that shows that qualitative inquiry can, in fact, be quite powerful. Start to take a look at things like credibility techniques. If you're, I can send you some citations for that. Kurt, did you know Ellen Brantlinger?
I did know her, and she was very sad that she passed away. She worked with a number. I was on committees with her. Yeah, in the old. Yeah. But some of my students had her as their advisor, and they were very sad when she passed away.
I've never met her. I've cited some of her works quite often. In 2005, in Exceptional Children, she is lead author on a piece that talks about indicators of quality in qualitative research. And in that is a very convenient table. And in fact, it's on, I want to say it's figure 2, page 201. I'll put that since we're being recorded. And there she lists a number of different techniques that one can use in qualitative inquiry to help address, what really the third big gripe about it, which is how do you know it's systematic? How do you know that qualitative work is rigorous? How do you know what you know? And so I'll give you an example. One thing that we can engage in is the notion of what's called member checks, member checks. When I conduct a series of interviews, I might conclude from that, hey, here's a particular need. And someone might come along and say, well, how could you be sure that you're biased and it gets so far under in there that you're not seeing what they're trying to tell you? Well, you can go back and ask them. It's called a member check. When that's just one of easily a dozen different kinds of techniques where if you build that into your design, you start to create a really, I think, potentially powerful case for convincing people that you're learning something that you would not have known had you not conducted the research. And Denzin, of course, is another Kurt, I don't know if you've worked with him or not. And Egon Guba.
Yeah, he was before my time, but yeah.
He was before your time.
Yeah. Him and his wife both, I think they left for Houston or something, or they went somewhere.
That's interesting. Well, if next time you're walking into that's the name of the building where the school of ed is that right?
Yeah.
It's been a while since WRIGHT. There are some bricks at the very at the entrance, and there are names on those bricks. And have a look, and you're going to see Guba's name and people like that who are there.
Okay, so either he donated or someone donated in his name. So Egon Guba is the big qualitative person. And after that, we had a guy named Tom Schwant, who you may or may not know from University. He went to Illinois.
Yep.
I've seen a number of, so IU is known for quantitative methods. So we put Ellen Brantler's name, and maybe I'll send you an email, John, for that article in Young Children. We need to go to the second person. I'll point out Sabahat.
I already put that in the chat, and I found it, and the figures in there with.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Was I right? I'm curious if I.
You were right. Yes. You're like Bob Foote at Cornell. He knew like everything. He knew it down to the page number of journal articles. So thank you very much.
That's just one I happen to know. I know Bob Foote.
So Sabahat put the link to your book in the chat window as well. So thanks, Sabahat. We go to Megan next. Megan.
Hi. Well, Kim, I mean, your answer to Kim sort of addressed mine. I'm the 1/9 of the group who's planning to just do a qualitative study. Because of the scale. I am, and by the way, I went to Stony Brook, another school.
Yeah,
so.
And Megan was in North Carolina and is now in Philadelphia. Is that right?
Correct. Yes. I was in North Carolina for about 15 years. After I graduated from Stony Brook, I grew up on Long Island. I got my master's from UNC Charlotte, and now I'm up here in Philly. So my whole rest of my family went to Indiana, though, so it's about time I got a degree from there. So, at any rate, I am doing also a needs analysis for the current state, analyzing the current state of professional development for educators in high schools to support LGBTQ youth. And actually, just today, GLSEN's 2021 climate survey came out, and the data is not great. So, we're not trending in the right direction. There's been an increase in harassment since 2019. There's been an increase. Now that's, of course, statistically, I'm a math person. So statistically, right, is that just because more people answered the survey this time, blah, blah, blah. But I'll read the report eventually. But anyway, so I'm looking at the current state of professional development and then what needs to be done to help school faculty support these students better. And so it's going to be a fairly small scale study where I look at maybe 1 or 2 schools and interview teachers, school counselors, administrators, and then eventually I'd like to be able to scale it up. But I think for the dissertation, I need to keep keep it somewhat small.
Very good. Are you thinking of a case study or like a particular school?
No. If I did a particular school, it would probably lean more case study. I would like to determine, what needs exist in the realm of professional development. So that may mean expanding out to more schools, whether it's regionally or something like that, so that I can get a better picture. I don't think I've nailed that part of it down yet in terms of how many schools, how many people I'm going to be able to access to. That's going to be the other problem, is access. So if it does end up being one school, yeah, I mean, it could be a case study, but it,
one of the things that comes to mind is that, there is this notion of how large of a sample is going to be adequate in qualitative inquiry. And there's some interesting work that's come out around that. You can even put in phrases like qualitative power and also reference the notion of saturation. And there's in field methods, as I recall, has a couple of pieces that are out there where one takes the experiences of other qualitative researchers and uses that as a basis for trying to understand how to plan the number of interviews and the number of people and the length of those interviews in advance to help ensure that you're likely to have an adequate data set for addressing your question. Guest Bunsen Johnson, that comes to mind. The guest isn't Be My Guest, Bunce, BUNCE, and something like that. I'm not quite remembering, but they've got an interesting line of work that's come out. And again, it would be in field methods. If you put in guest qualitative sample size, if someone could look that up while I'm talking to help confirm, I'd appreciate it.
Cindy will probably look it up, right, Cindy?
Thanks. It's well known enough, that work, that it'll come up in the standard Google search. But another thing to think about then is where you start getting into some really interesting qualitative work, and this would demonstrate, I think, the merit of qualitative inquiry is if you're getting into the professional development needs so that you can have some assurance that faculty and staff are able to meet the needs of LGBTQ students, especially as we get into different ages, and especially as we start getting into the changing ecology around this, because right now we're dealing with schools that's are dealing with what's the phrase, it's on the tip of my tongue. It's a political matter, but the so-called concern about
the don't say gay bill.
Yeah, and being woke in
Florida, right?
Yeah. And so I think it becomes very important then to pay attention to the context in which you're planning to operate, because working in at a high school in Florida might be a different kettle of fish than than operating in a middle school in Philadelphia. So what you might start to think about then is developing a contextual model that helps explain what the PD needs are likely to be. And by that, I mean referencing baseline thinking around protective factors pertaining to LGBTQ students, baseline attitudes, things that faculty might not really know, but would be much more comfortable telling you about in an exploratory interview. You could even, Indiana University is known for qualitative work. It's also known for exploring human sexuality. You might want to be able to take a look at some of the work that's out there too, because I think one of the pieces that even comes up is recent work that's focused on if a person identifies in the LGBTQ or straight arena, does that necessarily mean that you're connecting to the physical act of sex? Because there's some folks that are out there right now who would say that I'm gay, but that doesn't mean when I'm attracted to someone, it's more of a platonic piece to it. And so we're really advancing some of our understanding of some of these matters. So context is going to drive quite a lot. The baseline needs, and then being able to understand how much of professional development is really going to be helpful for addressing what you started out as the big problem, which is that LGBTQ students are not being adequately served.
Yeah, I'm looking up with Caitlin King. That's the name. So this LGBTQ plus cultural center at IU does a lot of trainings and things, seminars, webinars on different issues. And there's a student who's done, I'm sorry if you can hear my kids in the background, this student, Caitlin King, who's done a lot of really good webinars for the LGBTQ Cultural Center out of Indiana. They're all online, they're all virtual, they're great. And she's a student, she does great ones, but just addressing what you said, right? There's this spectrum of romantic attraction, sexual attraction, right? All these different types of things, and gender identity, and, you know, gender expression. And so it's very complex, right? And then exactly like you said. So yeah, it's, and coming from North Carolina, and I did a mini needs analysis on this in my needs analysis class, right? So I did a mini version of it. And yeah, I mean, the needs are definitely going to be different geographically, right? Location is a big thing, even within Pennsylvania, depending on where you are. So I really appreciate the input. I don't want to take too much more for other people, but one question I would ask you, other than scale, meaning like if I needed more information from more people, I might want to incorporate a survey or something like that. What other benefit would there be if I were using a smaller sample size? What other information might I be able to get from a survey that I couldn't get from an interview?
I definitely want to answer that. Just one other thing to keep in mind that would be an interesting piece is you could also even think about how does one actually do a needs assessment, because there might be great utility in that, because if we're dealing with very different microcultures within the United States, that might, you know, that might be a very sort of the methodology is generalizable, not so much the findings. Getting back to your great question. One of the things that, yeah, of course, if you were to develop, and we mentioned Creswell earlier in this conversation, he coined that great phrase where he was referring to what's called the sequential exploratory design. And what he means by that is, in the typical sequential exploratory design, you can begin that work with first there's a sequence, there's stages. One typically goes with qualitative inquiry, and then you move into the quantitative phases. And in the standard sequential exploratory design, one conducts a series of interviews, observations, document analyses. That gives you a sense of context and understanding of the phenomena well enough that you could write a really very well targeted survey. Then that survey, what it would allow you to do is be able to engage in inquiry with a much larger group of people than you can possibly, than you would be able to interview unless you had massive resources. And that's the most basic rationale for mixing of the qualitative and survey side of work. What can you learn beyond that? Because you know that, you made that clear in your question. One of the things that I've seen, in fact, I've been involved in some work around this, is you can move beyond the sequential exploratory design into what's called the multi-phase design. And so you might, for example, start to get into some psychometric analyses of the results of your survey, as well as just more broad survey standard descriptive analyses, and start to realize that maybe you don't actually have the same grasp of the phenomena that you initially thought. And so I worked with a student who did something similar at one point, where she was interested in developing a measure of trust. And that measure of trust was deployed in a clinical relationship. In her particular case, it was athletic training. I didn't know this before this. I thought athletic trainers just take your ankles when you get hurt, but apparently there's like a whole thing to it. So she started out with the sequential exploratory design, and started to conduct a series of IRT and factor analytic work, where the results of the statistical analyses were coming back that we were not able to get good fitting items, and the survey wasn't performing as we thought we might, given our qualitative inquiry. And that gave us some insight, a completely different way of looking at the phenomena of trust, and realizing that we didn't really have as good a concept of that slippery construct as we thought, necessitating going back into doing more interviews and getting a much more refined sense of what it is that we mean when we're talking about trust, and really trying to get at, because when you think about it, if I said define the word trust, it gets tough, right? It's a word we use all the time, but it's not easy. And so anyway, that back and forth between that sort of handshaking between quantitative and qualitative inquiry led to a much deeper understanding of the construct. I think that was assumed that she had at the end of the first qualitative phase, but it turned out she had to do more work to really have a sense that she really got it. And it was the fact that things were not working out quantitatively that made it plain to her. And actually, we published that work in the Journal of Mixed Methods Research. It's it demonstrates how sometimes quantitative inquiry can slow down your qualitative assumptions.
So John, we've got the article in the chat here from Guest and Bunce and Johnson. It's How Many Interviews Are Enough from February 2006. Thanks, Sunmei. She found it as an open access through ResearchGate. So it's there. I think I'm going to switch. Ben's going to go, not going to go next. I think I'm going to A-Shot, because A-Shot, I think, might be your teacher's, your daughter's teacher. She's at Bloomington North as a science teacher.
Abby?
Yeah, and maybe she, I don't know. So A-Shot, you want to tell him what you do at Bloomington North and see if maybe you're his daughter's teacher.
There's a little tiny thing called Pepper. Anyway, hi, good evening. That name is kind of familiar. That's all I'm going to say. Yeah, I'm one of the science teachers there. I also coach Science Olympiad, Girls in Engineering, Math and Science clubs, then Drone Club. So if your kid is into any of those.
Drone Club. So what do you teach? Is it chemistry or?
Okay, actually I used to teach chemistry. I stopped teaching that about 3 years ago. So right now I teach honors biology, general biology, principles of biomedical sciences, human body systems. So you can see, yeah, this year I'm teaching 4 classes. Yeah.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
It's a lot. And A-Shot, did you recognize that Tony is Nigerian?
Last name, yeah.
Yeah,
that's a Nigerian name.
It is a Nigerian name. Just as a quick aside, Tony won't mind that I tell you all that he is. So he lives in London, and again, and he commutes to Cambridge a lot because that's where his main faculty home is. But he's got 3 passports. He's a U.S. citizen. He is a British citizen, and he is a Nigerian citizen. Yeah. And his name, I asked him about this. It actually means Onwebuze means your name shall never die. Go figure.
Yeah. Nigerian names, they have meanings. They have a lot of meanings.
Yes, they do. Yeah. I think my last name has something to do with the chicken. I'm not sure.
I think it has to do with the famous Alfred Hitchcock movies, which you said you're related in a, fourth cousin or something, right?
Yes. Yeah. But my father told me that I am in fact related to Alfred Hitchcock. And if anybody looks up a picture of Alfred Hitchcock and sees him standing, you'll notice that I have a similar body type and haircut. So go figure.
The genes are strong.
So tell them what you're up to, and we'll try and get to everyone at least to ask a question. So I'll point out that John and Merve were going to be on separate weeks because of AECT is next week. I put them both together, and that's why we've got a lot of good stuff tonight. I thought this is a power pack night. There's so much. John, you've been full of great answers. So A-Shot.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Actually, talking about case studies, my research is centered on simulations in high schools. Does that make sense? Simulations in science classrooms, yeah. Focus 9th through 12th grades. My issue, I just want to find out, or rather, let's start with my research question. Major, what factors teachers take into consideration when they're selecting or adopting virtual simulation, as well as trends in the use of simulation in science classrooms?
So selection and training of teachers to use them, and their selection process in using them.
Not training teachers in using them. It's just the teachers themselves. Like, I want to use this.
Okay.
We notice among teachers within a particular area, my context, science. Does that make sense? Okay, that's just it. So what trends do I see? What do they consider? If I see 5, why do I decide to use 3 of them? Things like that. Because I figured if you read most of the research on simulations, look at it that these are wonderful things that help students learn. Yeah. What about the teachers? To me, I think that's the gap. You don't really know how teachers decide, when they decide. Also, how do they even assess these things? How do they know about them? So I just wanted to look at that area. That brings me to, just as I said, put the horse before the cart. That was my research question. And with my background, I was thinking of mixed methods because I wanted figures. I just want something like a percentage, give me a percentage, what ratio is compared to this. So when I'm discussing my results, it makes sense. So that's why I aligned myself with the mixed method instead of just plain qualitative, right? Now, there was a question that came to mind. Somebody asked me, if you are doing mixed method, the quantitative aspect, what is your variable? I never thought of it from that aspect because like when you think of variables, I think of scientific method, independent and dependent variable. In this case, what variables am I supposed to look at? There is that. And when I thought about what I wanted to do, I thought about it from the perspective of, okay, a case study. But all the readings I seem to come across, they say case studies has to be like maybe a reviewing or researching within one particular school. But I was under the assumption that you can do case studies as you bound it within a particular population. In my case, can I say I'm doing a case study within this population of a 9th through 12th grade science teachers instead of putting it within just this building? Does that make sense?
I think so. And I have the sense that I have been giving too long answers and not giving everybody a chance, but so I'll try to be a little bit more succinct here, but a couple of reactions. If you are, let me just make sure I have this right. Your fundamental idea is that you want to see science teachers interact with the simulation so that they can learn more about teaching. Did I get that right?
No.
I didn't.
No.
What? Tell me again. What they're doing?
The main idea is this: teachers use simulations, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want to find out what factors they consider before they decide which one they use for their students.
Oh, okay. So
yes, from that perspective. Also, trends in terms of what type of simulations are they using?
Okay, so I'm a science teacher. I have different kinds of simulations at my disposal. What are the factors that inform what simulations I would use under what circumstances?
Perfect. Yes.
Okay, thank you for that. Lots of reactions. The first one is if we're talking about the notion of what's your variable, right there. I mean, one variable is you can think of it as categorical if you wish, but if there's multiple simulations that are available or simulation types, what are the things that are selected and why? Then another variable I would think about, another way I would think about your inquiry there is how does that variable inform their pedagogical decisions? If I have a science teacher who is purposeful in the selection of a particular kind of simulation approach in order to make a point during teaching, what is their thought process around that? Might you look into things like, does that translate into improved learning outcomes for students? And so there is yet again another variable. You might be able to do pre-post work with quizzes and things along those lines. Mm-hmm. You might, depending on if you did a case study work, you might think about a classroom as a case, and you rather than interviewing large numbers of students, you can perhaps conduct a survey with them to ask questions like, what did they like about the simulation? What did they feel they've learned from? How did they benefit? What are ways in which simulation work might be altered so that they can learn yet more? What are weaknesses to the process from a student's point of view? And those would be all different ways to start to specify a number of quantitative variables if you wanted to go into a mixed methods realm. One other set of variables that would be out there would be questions like if you were to observe a teacher using a simulation, when did they use it, for how long, how often? And then you could mix around questions along the lines of what was the reason for why they used a particular simulation at that particular time, and what rationale did they have, which would get you into some more qualitative work.
Right.
Okay.
And I could keep going on, but I'm afraid that
that makes sense.
Overdo it. But I hope that helps.
Yeah, he did a lot. Although I'm going to limit it to just the teacher's perspective. I want to avoid students, but from teacher's perspective, I can see how lesson plans help me with that information as well. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Thank
Glad to
you.
help.
So John, would you recommend that she just explore what's happening in Bloomington North or go beyond Bloomington North?
That's a really good question. I think part of what would drive that would be so we were talking about case studies, and we need to also keep in mind there's different kinds of case studies. A really good source for this would be Robert Yin, Yin.
I have his book.
Okay, good. And also and take a look at Stake, Staka, Stake. He's over at he was at University
of Illinois. Yeah, Robert Stake.
Robert Stake. And they both had different phrases for the different types of case studies, but they refer to the notion of, okay, so you have multiple case studies, then you also have what's called an intrinsic case study. You also have what's called an extrinsic case study. And these different kinds of approaches to case study methodology, and this very much gets back to Kurt's question, can help drive whether or not you want to stay in Bloomington North or do you want to extend out. If you were dealing with phenomena that was highly rare, like let's suppose you're looking at a scenario where you think, there's this simulation environment that's going on, and the simulations are unusual, the teacher's approach is unusual, the learning that's occurring in this classroom appears to be particularly effective, and I don't really see it replicated in other places. So I want to try to understand how this was done here in this way, so that we could draw some lessons from it. Maybe a parallel idea would be, imagine someone conducting a study of the first ever MOOC, right? We don't know what MOOCs are. This is the first time it's ever done. So I'm going to do a case study around that first MOOC, and so that we could draw lessons from it.
I know a person who did that. So and she was a guest in my class 2 years ago. She's a friend. She did this case study of the first MOOC, her and a colleague. Yeah.
All right. Excellent.
Well, they have a chapter in one of my books, actually. So yeah. So I want one of my MOOCs books. So
I'm glad I brought it up, because in that case, what you would be doing is studying. In that case, that's really actually, I'm careful with the word unique, but that would be a unique case in the sense that by virtue of the fact that it's the first one that's ever been done. If you start getting into what if we start getting into MOOCs, but there's several kinds, they're all sort of in the same category, I could classify them, there's a few different approaches. In that case, I might want to start to look at a multiple case study, so that I can compare and contrast the different types of MOOCs, or drawing it back to the simulation of work at hand. If you started to find that there's commonly used simulations, and let's say I want to focus in chemistry, and I know that there's a particular simulation where it's fairly broadly used, but we don't really have enough documentation around the thinking process that teachers engage in and the reaction students have. That would be a different approach, where you're not really trying to understand something that's rare or unique. What you're trying to do is use the case study methodology so that you can start to explain something that's existed for a while. And both are highly valuable, but getting back to the question of whether or not one should be conducted in Bloomington or not, I would let my understanding of how the simulations are being used to help drive that. Are you looking at phenomena that's rare? Are you looking at phenomena that's more common? And if it's the latter, then my inclination would be to expand beyond Bloomington.
Okay.
So mine would too. Yeah. My recommendation too would be to expand. And the article, the first MOOC study, was Rita Kopp and Helene Fournier from the National Research Council of Canada, Pedagogy of Abundance or Pedagogy of Support Human Beings. Participants supporting in a massive open online course. I'll get the number of citations here in a second, but that was in effect. So what they were doing, the people teaching that course were trying to prove the theory of connectivism. So a case study of that MOOC was critically important from a theoretical point of view. So they're doing more than just offering a MOOC. They're trying to validate the theory that they had designed, a new supposedly a new theory. It might not have been a new theory, it might just be social constructivism in a new bottle of wine. We need to go to another simulation study. Sabahat, you want to talk about your work with Rob Goldstone?
Yeah, I can talk more about simulations. So I have been so far making lab experiments on statistics simulations. We've been designing simulations and testing them. And, it's pretty straightforward. Does this simulation work better than that simulation? kind of like A/B tests in lab experiments. So there was nothing mixed about it so far. But to make it kind of more interesting to our education community, now I have some ideas about what kind of simulation might be better than other simulations based on those past experiments I did. Now I want to do a case study of a simulation which I think is better than other simulations. So it will be a case study. And I haven't been thinking about framing it as mixed study until you came today. But there will be some pre-post data, like how students performed at the beginning and how they performed after they experience the simulation, and do some interviews with the students. And my overall research focuses how students reason about concepts with those simulations. So as I said, I haven't been thinking about framing it as mixed methods. I was just thinking, I'm going to do a case study. I will collect some qualitative data. I will collect some quantitative data. And my question is, do you think would I be missing something if I'm not aware of that whole mixed methodology in that case? Would you recommend to somebody like me to be aware of mixed method research and potentially use it as a framework in that case? Does that make sense? I think my question is something like, if we collect both quantitative, qualitative data, should we be aware of mixed method research?
Okay, so if you are planning to collect quantitative and qualitative data, then yes, I think you should be aware of mixed methods research. And keeping in mind that doesn't mean you necessarily have to use mixed methods research. Here again, we don't want to put the cart before the horse. There's actually another phrase that's out there. It's called multiple methods. And so actually some sociologists, Brewer and Hunter, did some work along these lines where they talked about how mixed methods, that you can have multiple methods in the sense that you can have multiple forms of quantitative inquiry. You could have survey regression, the survey factor analysis regression, quantitative. So you have a multiple method in that realm. You can have multiple qualitative methods. You could be putting together case study work with ethnographic techniques if you needed to. But mixed methods is a special case of multiple methods when you're using quantitative and qualitative. From there, if you don't really mix the two, then really what you're engaging in is what we would call parallel design. I put no valence. I'm not saying one is better than the other. It depends on what you're trying to learn, and you should use the methodology that best suits your needs. If you do want to get into the mixed methods realm when it comes to case studies, a person who's got some interesting work, pretty recent on this actually, would be Vicky Plano-Clark. When you read Creswell's work, it's generally going to be Creswell and Plano-Clark, and Vicky actually has a chapter on mixed methods case studies in that book that I showed you earlier in this meeting. But it's, I think the ideas would be pretty straightforward. If you were looking at a simulation study and you were trying to understand how students react to a statistical concept, you could, on the qualitative realm, get into some pretty deep interviewing around what they knew about a statistical idea prior to being exposed to the simulation, learn more about their understanding afterwards. But in the quantitative realm, excuse me, you could use all kinds of different numerical forms of information, such as how often does the student use the simulation? Did they is there evidence to believe that they needed to use it only once to get it, or are you dealing with something that's a little bit more hard to grasp the first time around, like if you're dealing with normal curve stuff or whatever, or confidence intervals? Maybe what is helpful is that students do better when they play with that simulation a lot, in which case you can do things like count it. You could ask questions where there is an inherent mixing, like, okay, I think that this idea you now understand, but at what point exactly did you gain that comprehension, and how much credit do you give to the simulation? What else did you do? And so what Vicky's work would incur, she provides a pathway for how to think about the mixing of different methods in the context of the case study, so that you can you could get into a deeper form of inquiry. But again, I encourage you not to do that unless you think it is going to help you. Mixed methods is a tool. I use tools all the time in my trade, and if I need to write a paper, I use Microsoft Word, and if I need to cut wood, I use a saw. And depending what I'm up to, I'll use the tool for the job. And sometimes mixed methods are really helpful, and sometimes they are not.
Does that help, Sabahat?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Glad to talk.
I'm sure John will love an update when you're getting through at the end, because you're right here in Bloomington. Maybe we'll have a toast downtown to celebrate. We'll
go to Mother Bear's.
We'll go to Mother Bear's or Lenny's or the Tap or someplace. And Ben can drive up from Louisville. Ben, you want to tell him what you're up to? He's been waiting patiently. I told him he's next about 4 different times.
All good stuff. Thank you very much. I'll try to keep it pretty short as a question. So I support physician assistant faculty, and an interesting fact about PA faculty, only about half of those coming into teaching have any background, any sort of training on how to teach. So I'm interested in exploring how instructional consultants, designers support someone with no background in education. And especially it seems like there's some interesting personality dynamics. So you have a medical professional meeting a teacher. So my plan, mixed methods, survey a general area. So the organizational body divides America up into regions. So survey my region. What's your perceptions of instructional design? What's your support? And then go out and interview hopefully at least 3 different PA faculty, hopefully someone with lots of support, medium support, and almost no support. So the question there, I guess, is, how does that sound? What am I missing?
And by the way, he's at Louisville at Spalding University.
Sullivan. Yeah.
Sullivan University. I'm sorry.
Nope. Very, very.
I know Spalding,
Yep.
Sullivan. And the same question applies. Should he stay local within Sullivan, or should he go regional? And we talked about this, whether he goes regional. A couple different questions for you, John.
Gotcha. So, it's interesting. You're going into the physician assistant world. The now long-standing editor of the journal Mixed Methods Research, which has got a pretty high impact factor. It's a well-known journal. Is Mike Fetters, and he runs a family physician program at the University of Michigan. And so much of Mixed Methods work has been advanced in the medical field, and I think that they would take some real interest in what it is that you're up to. Fetters, Dr. Fetters is closely aligned with John Creswell, and so we'll go back to one of the Creswellian designs before I talked about the sequential exploratory design. What you're talking about sounds an awful lot like a sequential explanatory design. So before we were doing qualitative inquiry, and then what we do is go to quantitative. Here, what you do is you conduct your quantitative inquiry first, and then you get into some qualitative pieces. If you stay within the PA region that makes the most sense to you, then I think how much qualitative work would I have to engage in? Usually what one does in those explanatory sequential designs is that you conduct your quantitative step first, and then you start to see what kinds of interesting trends and findings come as a result of your survey effort, and then use that to guide your qualitative decision making. Suppose you find some really odd outliers around those personality dynamics, or what if you start to find that you could put different kind of people into categories based on their survey response behavior. We have PAs who are really amenable to teaching. They're really excited about it. Maybe you have other PAs that say, look, I don't really, this is not my thing. Maybe you have some group that's in the middle. So you can actually use that set of findings to drive some of the follow along qualitative inquiry you would engage in, because in that case, you would start to say, well, actually, I think it makes sense for me to get representation across those three different categories I just completely made up out of the blue. Then I might find that I have to move outside of a particular region in order to be able to have reasonable coverage across all those three different areas, especially when I think about sample size considerations from the Getz, Bunsen, Johnson work. Just to kind of, play out some scenarios. Another thing you might run into is, what if you find that you have a very small N, but very, very interesting input on from some survey work from someone's got some really unusual responses, and the nature of those responses really intrigue you, but you're talking about just a couple of people. In that case, you might say, I'm going to pivot more towards like almost a phenomenological kind of approach, which is a very intensive qualitative way of looking at just a small number of people. It doesn't mean you have less data, because typically but we have to remember in qualitative work, it's not just how many people who you interview, it's how often you interview them. And so, if you were to come across a person who's deeply experienced in the amalgamation of teaching and PA work, and you thought to yourself, I could really actually understand the phenomena quite a lot in elements of my survey data, but I'm going to hang around this one or maybe two people. And then all of a sudden, maybe staying in a region is fine, but it's not so much about regional representation. It's more about being able to explore ideas deeply with unusual experts. So one of the nice things about these design setups is there is an inherent flexibility where you first kind of see what you learned from your first stage and let that guide your later decision making. We would call that emergent design principles. A person who, for some good justification for that, would be Michael Patton, Patton. He's a qualitative evaluation methodologist, and he's got some great books with SAGE, where the idea behind emergent design methodologies in the context of these multi-phase designs is actually considered a sign of rigor. Because what you're doing is you're waiting to see what you get and not making premature decisions around how many interviews you need or whom you're going to interview.
So John, that's a really good reference for him, Michael Patton, because I've seen students put in their dissertations explanatory sequential design and not have a reference that back it up, and they get asked that question in the dissertation proposal meeting or in the defense, and they're at a loss for explaining how they came up with that. So number one, you want to write that down. Sue may write that down, and she'll put it in the summary for tonight. So that's really important.
And Kurt, I'm sorry, just to clarify one thing, Creswell and Plano Clark would be the best source for thinking about this, the explanatory sequential design.
Yes.
Natalia Ivankova is another one. And by the way, she's a public health researcher out of University of Alabama, Birmingham. So she'll appreciate some of the PA pieces that you have in place. Patton is a really good source for emergent design thinking.
Okay. John, do you know Trina Paulus in her book with SAGE on digital tools for qualitative research?
Very little about that.
You've heard, okay. She's an alum of both language ed and IST. I think she double majored. And then she wrote one of her books with Alyssa Wise. So you'll see Paulus and Wise. One of their books is Rutledge, and maybe she's got 3 books, and she's now in Tennessee. She went to Georgia. This book on digital tools for qualitative methods was, it generated a lot of workshops for her, and she has huge audiences. And people at the University of Georgia just gave her full professor status if she'd moved to Georgia. So she did from Tennessee, University of Tennessee. But then she went back to Tennessee because she was married to someone up in Tennessee. But she just came out with a new book, and so she's an alum. I'm thinking maybe I should bring her in next semester when I teach this class, to get people looking at what the digital tools out there for the qualitative methods that they might utilize. I think, I'll contact Trina.
Sounds like a great resource.
Yeah, or Alyssa, or both. So Ben, did that answer your question?
Oh, this has been very, very helpful. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Ben.
So we got Shannon left. And so Shannon's the last one, but then I'll have Sunmei, who's my TA, just tell you about her dissertation, which she's collecting data. I'll give Sunmei the last minute or two before we go. So Shannon, your question and your study? And she's in Milwaukee, where they drink real beer.
That's right. All the beers.
She moved from Indiana up. She's working for the Indiana Medical School, and decided where can she live? Why was she? Oh, Milwaukee, where they make good beer.
Beer, brats, and cheese, exactly, and Lake Michigan.
And let's not forget Laverne and Shirley.
That was our announcement. I photoshopped ourselves in the brewery, Schatz Brewery.
And Leave It to Beaver, but okay. Yeah.
Oh, that I did not know.
Well, it was in Racine, I think, but close enough. Close enough.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
My study is looking at how instructional designers are used within medical education. So at various medical schools, medical student education, how do these schools utilize instructional designers? And it's going to be a mixed methods. I'm going to send out surveys and then ask people if they're willing to be interviewed for a gift card. And then the interviews, I'll, dive deeper into asking, questions about what they do in their roles and that sort of thing. And design models and so forth. My question is triangulation. So I've got these two things, and feedback that I've gotten in classes along the way, it cracks me up. It's like, well, what are you going to triangulate? Where's your triangulation? What are you triangulating? And I don't know. That's my answer. I don't know. No instructors are like giving me hints or pointing to the right direction, what my third source would be, just that I don't have it, which I know because I have no clue. I've tried Googling it. I don't know what I'm supposed to do for a triangulation with this.
Okay. That's interesting. So I'll have to ask a couple of questions to help dig a little bit deeper. I do want to point out that Brandlinger article I talked about has triangulation listed there, and we need to also keep in mind that there's different kinds of triangulation. There's what's called theoretical triangulation. There's methodological triangulation. There's sample member triangulation, at least. There's probably some more. So like, what's the difference between them? Sample member triangulation might be where if I'm talking to instructional designers and if I'm talking to faculty who are teaching these courses and students, those are three different stakeholder groups. And what do all three of them say about a particular phenomenon? Is there agreement between them? Is there disagreement? If you have someone who is using an instructional design principle and says you should really be able to see this in the classroom, and if the instructional designer and the faculty member are saying, yeah, that's in there, it's working, but the students are saying, what are you talking about? It's not translating to something I understand. Then that gets into an interesting point about cross-stakeholder triangulation, because one of the things that we have to keep in mind is triangulation is a verb. It's not really an outcome. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have corroboration. If you see an event like I just made up there, it implies that you have to dig deeper to understand why is it that two stakeholder groups, but not your end users, have got it. Mm-hmm. Another thought about triangulation is it does imply three, but hence, because triangles have three points. But that's actually not necessary. You could triangulate with two. That's perfect. They're not breaking anything at all. You might have only two relevant stakeholder groups.
I only have one group.
So then you could also engage in what
Because what I'm doing is I'm doing surveys, big survey, and then interviews with this group. I'm not going to try and talk to faculty for my dissertation. That would just be shooting myself in the foot trying to deal with medical faculty responding to surveys. That will never happen. Medical students, they barely even answer their own assignments, let alone surveys, outside surveys. So I'm limited to the actual instructional designers who typically respond very well to these types of surveys.
Okay, gotcha. So then at a minimum, what you would be doing is being able to engage in methodological triangulation, which is a fancy way of saying, are you finding consistency or differences between your interviews and your survey results? Here again, so when someone says, where's your triangulation? That's your answer right there. I'm going to triangulate results from these two different methodologies.
Okay.
I did want to point out one thing really quickly. If you, in this context, I want, another data source that might be easy for you to get, which might be really insightful, it might lead to a lot of insights, that is to say, if you could get a hold of syllabi, and see, if instructional designers are helping to design a course and you can't talk to faculty, but you are able to look at some of the work products that they're putting out there, that might be something that would be helpful, because you could actually see potential enactment in the syllabus. And if you can't, that tells you something too. If you look at syllabi and you're saying this is useless to me, that's an interesting point.
Well, medical education is sort of a different beast. I primarily work with third-year medical students. My teaching that I do is as well as instructional design. And I think for first and second year students where they do actually take they're not even traditional courses really, except for anatomy, the hard sciences. Those are the really only courses that are they do a lot of, small group discussions. Third and fourth year, they're completely in the clinic. Mm-hmm. So it's really hard in our syllabus and all the stuff that we have to put in all seriousness. We have a Dr. Bonk syllabus. Our syllabus is about 28 pages, but ours says absolutely nothing.
Ah, gotcha. All right.
Yeah. And I'm the one who makes it, but I have to, check all these boxes for LCME accreditation.
All right. Well, if there's other kinds of work products like that, it doesn't necessarily have to be syllabi. There's other. You don't have to have perfect coverage throughout your sample. You could. By the way, one other thing I think I may have detected. One of the things that's nice about mixed methods is you don't necessarily have to have one-to-one correspondence across your different sample types. So in other words, you might have a lot of surveys, but you're only conducting just a few interviews.
Yes.
So even if you weren't going to be aggressive with the sample size for getting potential faculty members to respond to you, or perhaps students, sometimes a little bit goes a long way. And so it's just a thought where you might be able to open up your approach to some additional potential data sources. But getting back to the main question you have, if you told me, and I'm telling you this as a mixed methods researcher, if you said, okay, I'm triangulating between my interview responses and my survey findings, that makes perfect sense to me.
Okay.
No.
Okay. That's kind of what I thought. And I'm going to, of course, engage in member checking along the way. Big on that, just to make, sure of clarity. So I just didn't know what my third thing was supposed to be.
Oh yeah, you don't necessarily have to have a third thing. You can, two is good. Because triangulation is less about geometric shapes and more about the process of being able to understand phenomena by using the data points that are available and saying, okay, if I know this to be true and this to be true, that thing in the middle is probably also going to be true. It's almost kind of aligned with ordinary least squares regression in a sense. I try to give you an example. We just did that wonderful thing where we were able to hit an asteroid with a probe. Mm-hmm. We were able to, my understanding of this is we actually never saw exactly where it was using the technology that's available. We were able to infer its location from a distance by seeing different points and saying that's where it has to be. And so that's kind of like an example where you would triangulate different data sources to get you to a point to some sense of accuracy. And there's nothing about triangulation that necessarily means 3. I mean, you get a triangulation with 8 different data points, 15, whatever. And so there's nothing inherently magical around the number 3 when it comes to that process that I know.
But it is the magic number according to Schoolhouse Rock. Sumit, I have one more question. So something just kind of occurred to me while you were talking, Dr. Hitchcock, and I do have access to Indiana University teaching faculty. I do have access to, because the problem is getting email address, because these people are physicians as well as teaching faculty. You can't find their emails anywhere because of patience, because they don't want patients, you can imagine.
Yeah.
So emails are not easily accessible, but I do have access to ours. It would be good, bad, or indifferent if I was able to send a survey to IU teaching faculty, just one institution. Now, we are the largest medical school in North America, and we do have the most faculty.
My quick thought on that is, as long as you can make it that a sensible step given the research question and your purpose, then that seems reasonable. And the other thing that I've always been a huge fan of is if I can more simply get data, then you should probably do it, because research is hard.
Yeah.
How many are you talking about? How many teaching faculty at IU?
Oh gosh. Oh, hundreds.
Okay, it's over 100.
Hundreds.
Okay.
Oh yeah, hundreds.
So I would agree with Dr. Hitchcock. I would do it. I would try, at least plan for it if it fits your in. Yeah. And so go ahead.
I was going to say, I could just send it out and, I'm throwing spaghetti at the wall. We'll see what sticks. Well, maybe I'll get a decent response on, yay, I can do something with it, or I don't. And I just drop that.
Yeah. So some students collect extra data when they dissertate. And then, one of my advisees, Mena Ju, published the extra data, that she collected.
Yeah.
And some students do that. So I want to point out, when I went to Madison, I didn't, for grad school, I didn't take a qualitative methods course. And so when I graduated and went off to West Virginia, my first year, I got an email from someone in Israel wanting me to talk to her about what triangulating my methods. And her name was Rachel Sagiv, I believe. And I met her 20 years later at a conference. But it was really stupid. I did not know what triangulation meant, because I was never trained in qualitative methods. So number one, I'm saying take as many inquiry classes as you can, so you don't look stupid like I did in my first year as a faculty member. And any inquiry class you take is a good class, whatever it is. They all serve a purpose. They'll all enlighten you. I'd say, and Dr. Brush is a firm believer in more inquiry is better. And I think Dr. Hitchcock would also agree, wouldn't you, John?
Yeah, sure. I took as many as I could when I was in graduate school.
Yeah. Well, this is my last class. I will not be taking any more for fun.
Gotcha.
Oh, please no.
Oh, no.
So I'll also point out that that 70s show was also in Milwaukee on the west side.
Okay.
Here where I grew up, it was in, I think that's Waukesha. It's pretty close.
Waukesha.
So,
alrighty.
So we need to go to Soon-May last. Is it just explain your study to John, and we'll call it an end for tonight. And John, if you want to comment on her explanation, go ahead, Soon-May.
Actually, I think that you already gave really great suggestions. And then one of them, actually, my questions, actually, I'm just wondering what is the proper number of interview? But actually, I think already answered, so that's okay. But just to briefly explain my research, actually, I exploring the use of guided, role-based, and small group discussion board to promote peer interaction in higher education online courses. And then right now I'm collecting data. Yeah, so, and then actually interesting is that actually before, so I didn't, expect to think actually right now I'm working on collecting data. I saw, really interesting things. So that was really good for me. And then actually before I talked to Dr. Bonk about that. And then he said that, okay, just to keep going, right? That's because it may be changed later, something like that. So I'm working on it. So there is no specific questions, just to, everything you answered today was really valuable and useful for me. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks for saying so. One quick observation, if you and I should have said this earlier, that guest bunch work that you found is just the first. They have a follow-up article a few years later, and also my colleague Tony has an interesting piece. So that Tony Onwebuzi, and I think his article title is called Qualitative Power Analysis, and he's sort of making a joke in that title, but he does have some good points in that work, as does Guest, where they say it's not just the number of people to interview. It's, do you interview someone more than once? How long are those interviews? How might you think about things like member checks as a more detailed form of interview? So, and of course, the other thing that they get into is how effective might an interview be? So, for example, if you're able to, before you interview someone, look at pertinent documents. If I were going to interview a teacher and I was able to take a look at that teacher's syllabus and conduct a couple of observations, I might have a much more informed, fast interview than I would have had I just walked in and met him for the first time. So there's a lot of factors to consider when you're thinking about how much data and what quality of data that's out there. And that line of work, the 2 or 3 articles led by Guest and Tony's article, I think will give you a lot of insight into thinking through how much data do I really need to get.
Yeah, that's good.
So soon may studying my Monday night class and doing role play and all sorts of things in Canvas and getting the groups to interact based on their roles and looking at the transition between roles. It's kind of really interesting study. And so, I'm interested to hear the findings.
Actually, I'm collecting the discussion posts. That's a lot. And then every time, the first time I read and then I saw different thing. And then later I read one more time and then I found out different thing. So it was really interesting. That's because the same discussion board, and then after that, I'm just updating my rubric to evaluate discussion, posts. That's because the first time I think it's a really simple, rubric to evaluate each discussion post. And then later I needed to, add more detailed, rubrics to evaluate. So that's the reason I come back the first week, come back the second week or something like that. So it was interesting, but I think that it takes really, really much time than I expect here. Yeah, I guess that maybe over 1,000, maybe, I'm not sure. That's because usually every week around 70 to 90 discussion board, but right now I'm working on 15 weeks, so I think it's over 1,000 discussion posts. So it's a lot, I think. That
sounds like a lot. Yeah, I'd say I know what you mean, because I've offered asynchronous courses before, where the primary interaction between me and students and with students and each other was through discussion boards, and I had a rubric that I developed over time for evaluating the quality of posts. One thing I've always been interested in, I know you can do it, although it's not my area of expertise, but if you run into a scenario where you have a lot of posts to deal with, it's really going to take a long time to do. It is possible to engage in natural language processing, and you could basically start to use some of those technologies to help you manage a larger data set.
That sounds great.
And, by the way, that's a methodological triangulation opportunity, because if you were to say, look, I don't want to trust everything to a machine, you probably ought not to. So what you could do is take a random sample of posts, do your own personal evaluation, and make sure that make sure that you match them up with what you're doing through machine learning, and that would give you some assurance in the validity of the process. And then you could have the thing crawl around and work with much larger data sets.
Yeah, that sounds great. I will try. Thank you.
So Sunmi's an engineer and a mobile app developer.
Actually, I know about the NLP.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I'm trying to my programming skill for analyzing the data. Yeah, we're making faster.
At this little school called Stanford, she's
Ah.
at. You know, you might have heard of it. I don't know.
Oh, that's
She-
great.
She helped my friend Paul Kim design his SMILE
Yeah.
project, the Stanford Mobile Inquiry Learning Environment. Kids ask questions about their kids. And she's also working for an ed tech company in Berkeley doing total math games and learning math.
Yeah.
And all. So she can do it. If anyone
I'm
can do it.
developing mobile application.
Yeah.
That's great.
Whatever client needs. That's good.
Well, and hence the Golden Gate Bridge in your background. That's great. You know, there is NLP, natural language processing, available in R. I know that, and which means it'd be freeware. I don't know how to use it, but if you're an engineer, you're more likely to figure it out faster than I would. I think there's some stuff that you could do in Python, but there's also some specialty software that's out there. I even think one of the things that you could potentially do is, it depends on how much qualitative inquiry you want to get into, but you could also look at using some of the off-the-shelf programs that are out there. Provalis is a company, PROV is a victory, ALIS has a couple of different software packages where it's like text data mining software that's out there. And it all kind of depends on how much you want to have a program preset and made up. But Norm, who runs Provalis, he actually was explaining to me once that, Kurt, you'd get a kick out of this. He actually has an interesting demonstration where what he does is he actually starts to look at the State of Union addresses in the George Bush administration, and he can start doing things like correlating words like Iraq and terror and stuff like that. And that's where you get into some pretty crazy mixed methods applications, because it's kind of qualitative inquiry, but he's statistically analyzing words. He was able to demonstrate to me anyway that he worked with a really large data set where I wouldn't want to read all those and try to look for those interrelationships. It's much faster as long as you really understand what the software is doing to be able to engage in some of that work. And so you could apply something like that to posts when you get into big data, think like MOOCs and stuff like that.
Yeah. One of my students did that. He's in Singapore, or no, he's in Hong Kong. And he looked at the top 10 MOOCs and all the discussion wrapped around it, like the ratings. And then he found what were the top 10 pedagogical strategies by doing machine language learning analysis of all the comments on the most, and it was a fascinating study, and it was a great study. And his name is Timothy Hume, and he's done tons of research. I want to thank John for coming in tonight and doing more than more than anyone. I mean, he solved all our problems. So there's everyone could thank John. You see the range of knowledge. You see the range of the readings John's done, the depth of knowledge. We've learned new words. We've all learned new words. I learned one new word tonight: digger deeping. That was I don't know. I'm sure it's going to be a book title, John. I think I
meant to say digging deeper,
but I had to write that down. Just
Did I say digger deeping?
Yes, you did.
Sorry.
No. I wrote it down, and now I owe you a beer for bringing it up. So the first beer is on me wherever we head to, maybe later this week or next week. So again, I want to give John a round of applause. I mean, a real big round of applause. I want to thank him for all of his help. And I'm going to stop this recording up to the cloud. Week 9 is